You're listening to Small Farms Radio.
We're happy to loading our dogs in that old truck and doing our work.
Feeling the soil, I feel my community, I feel the people who raised me, I feel the Bronx that's defined me.
But it's just me and my rototiller on Saturday morning in my 3,000 square foot garden.
Welcome to the very first episode of Small Farms Radio. I'm your host, Jamie Johnson, and we wanted to start off this podcast with a question. It's a question that we've grappled with for a long time. Who is a farmer? Since we serve small farms, people often ask how we define a farmer. They are asking us to draw a line through all of the people producing food and fiber at different scales and with different intentions to decide who is a farmer and who is not. We are not the gatekeepers of this definition, nor do we want to be. Who calls themselves a farmer is really up to each person. How we each answer this question is, of course, heavily influenced by our community. Our hope today is to share with you some perspectives from our community, to help you reflect on your own definition and how it came to be. Lastly, we want to push you to think about who your definition serves. In that spirit, we asked members of our community who are doing this work to weigh in. We decided to play their responses as we got them, leaving their titles and names until the end. So, who is a farmer?
Those are so addicted to the land, they can't do anything else. No other job is even appealing. Their first goal is to own that land. And then as they get older, they realize they never will own that land. It owns you. And you can't do anything else. And you're just a caretaker for God's creation. And that's how I view, how I define a farmer.
A farmer is one that, or those that see the endless possibilities in anything, in a seed, in the ground, in the sky, in themselves, and a person who's willing to adapt to an environment that controls you, that determines your outcome. A person that's willing to understand more than just themselves and their place in the environment, but understanding their duty to the environment and how much the environment influences our whole existence.
For me, it was like, who is a farmer? Someone who is tending the land and who is growing food for their family and for their community and for the market. And yeah, I definitely didn't think of scale. I don't want to use the word conventional farmer. They're not in the farmers market and they don't have a CSA, but they are producing it's a lot of work, the scale they have. And they are working with the land so close and cultivating and producing and growing their own food, and how not to call that a farm?
So for my work at Soil and Water, which this is my 15th year, and I've spent every single year in the agriculture environmental management program, and that touts itself as a program for farms of all sizes. A farmer is anyone who runs a commercial enterprise through the use of land, buildings, equipment, and practices to carry out an agricultural enterprises. So it's fairly broad as long as that producer is trying to do something commercially. My own definition, I'll call it the broad definition of a farmer, who really is someone who cultivates crops or raises animals for food or raw materials.
I always joke that unfortunately, it's not like you can go out and apply for your license and somebody prints you out a card and says, congratulations, you're a farmer now, right? So it's definitely an interesting question. And I kind of look at it from two different perspectives. So I primarily work with farms on farm business management topics. So a lot to do with taxes and regulations. So if I kind of think about who's a farmer in that very straightforward, here's what the rules say way, right? Then that's where we get those hardcore numbers or the things that you can check off the box. So if we think about what makes a farmer from the IRS perspective, it's that you are operating your farm as a business, right? With the intent to earn a profit. Does not mean that you're actually earning a profit, but you have the intent to earn a profit. And that's how they're separating out, are you a farmer or are you a hobbyist or a homesteader? If we look at USDA definitions of what makes a farmer, their kind of bar, right, is that you're selling $1,000 worth of product. So $1,000 can be a lot and really daunting if you're moving from having a homestead to starting a farm or actively farming as a business. The other way that I try to think of it though, is that what's your purpose, right? Like, why are you doing that? So I think that even before you start selling your products, there's people that are growing food for their families, and then you start growing food for your neighbors, and then you start growing food for your community, and you might not even be selling it. You might be trading, you might be giving it away. And from my perspective, right, if you identify as a farmer at that stage, you might not meet what the IRS says you're a farmer or the USDA says that you're a farmer. But if in your heart you're a farmer because you're feeding people or you're growing something, then I count those folks as farmers. And I think that it's a question of like, who are you asking if you're a farmer or if you're not a farmer? So I look at it from both perspectives of like, is this a farm business or are you a farmer as a person who's intending to feed the people around you?
I think there's so much to that question of who is a farmer. I think I identify as a farmer and a farm worker. If I'm speaking to someone who's kind of outside of an agriculture context, I usually will just say I'm a farmer. I'll say that I farm for work. If I'm speaking to someone within agriculture, or speaking to someone who also works on farms, I will usually be more specific. And I'll say that I'm a farm worker, but I'll also be specific about what kind of farm I'm working on, what kind of work I do. For example, now, because I work at it's more of a community garden and a very small urban farm space within the community garden, I'll be really specific about that because I think it's a much different kind of work than the farm work I did in the last 3 seasons. I think when you're speaking to people who are coming from that same world, it's a little bit like there's a little more room to be specific. And when I'm speaking to farm owners or landowners, I definitely will be very pointed about saying that I'm a farm worker. I don't own land or I don't own a farm. And I do think that there is an impression of farmers being the people who run the farm or own the farm or own the land. And it's funny because I don't think that often doesn't mean that they're even doing farm work. It doesn't mean that they're involved in any kind of day-to-day running of the farm or attending to the land. But at the same time, I do think that anyone who like works with the land is a farmer. So I feel like it's a bit like complicated and it depends. And for me, I also am mindful of when and where I call myself a farmer, not because I think that farmers are the people who own the farms, but because I just have a respect for the skills that you have to build. And so, for example, if I'm speaking to people who have farmed their whole lives or who have been farming for a really long time, I'm really like particular to say that I am very much learning. Not that you're not always learning, but I'll say like I've been farming for this many seasons, or this is the kind of farm that I work on, and like just acknowledge that we may have very different sets of skills and backgrounds.
So, who's a farmer? I think it's actually not worth parsing that question in a you're in, you're out kind of a way. I think large scale corporate agribusiness producers are farmers, all the way down to mid-sized family farms, which are closer to the nostalgic picture of the old American family farm, all the way down to really intensive 2 to 10 acre farms, some of which are magnificently managed and productive on a $1 per acre level, kind of blow your mind. Some of the intensive vegetable and organic farms, super creative and innovative, they're farms. But maybe where you start scratching your head, so what about gardeners? Do we really need to distinguish? Like me, my whole life I've been gardening. I spend a large part of my weekends gardening, raising way more food than my family can consume, occasionally selling some stuff, mostly giving it away. But it's just me and my rototiller on Saturday morning in my 3,000 square foot garden. Am I a farmer? I don't call myself a farmer. I would never use that given my job and who I work with, but it doesn't really matter.
La pregunta es, ¿quién es un productor? Lo voy a contestar en el contexto de mi vida. I am going to answer in the context of my life, my family, and the community with which I interact the most. In Latin America and in many rural towns there, our life depends on agriculture, on production, and we learned to live by it. We learn to develop character, to dream, to develop life skills. And most of the people in my town are farmers. They are called producers, farmers, or campesinos, agricultores, that is, subsistence or peasant farmers. But in reality, they are people who love the land, who make a living by planting every day, harvesting even when they have no resources.
We just heard from farmers Tom Hudson, C. Mateus, Juliana Quaresma, and Malika Singh. We heard from service providers / farmers Caitlin Wally and Tucker Kautz. And we heard from Food Hub manager, but not farmer, Michael Rosen. Finally, our very own Mildred Alvarado, who manages our Futuro program, rounded out the segment. Now we're going to bring in a few members of our team to talk about what we heard. I'll let them introduce themselves.
This is Anu Rangarajan. I'm the director of the program and excited to be here.
We weren't supposed to laugh. I didn't laugh.
This is Erica Frenay, and I'm the Associate Director of Special Projects and Distance Learning.
I'm Casey Deemer, Communications Manager for the Cornell Small Farms Program.
When I've been asked this question in presentations, like, well, who is a small farm? And my standard response is, well, you're a small farm if you think you are. And it's similar here. You're a farmer if you think you are. But one of the tensions I think that also plays out is, and I've used this and I think about it a lot, is the public conception of farmers. And when we think of American Gothic, the framing of a farmer that was impacted by that one piece of art that's grounded in our collective psyche. I think that agriculture in general responded by saying farming is a profession and wanted to actively cultivate a contradiction to that in some ways. And so now we've gone so far in thinking about farming as a profession. In many ways, you can look at an agribusiness and there can be many people that are part of a very large farm that never touch the soil. They never are working directly with the land or animals, but they're very much identifying as farmer. They're part of the benefits of identifying as a farmer. And so you have what's happened in trying to professionalize something that is so fundamental to our survival of humans, that in some ways we've downplayed the importance of the heart and the intention. And it feels like there's this contradiction and an unnecessary tension between farming as heartfelt, not just about a money belt. It's heart. It's heart-centered work. You can't do this if you're not into it. And some people may feel trapped in the space of doing it. And that's where a program like ours is really trying to help people re-strategize and rethink the why, the what, the how of their work. But it's a passion that continues to play out on a day-to-day basis. I once met, I had a really interesting conversation with this farmer once, and we were talking about what's a new farmer, like a beginning farmer. And he says, every spring, and this person had been farming for 20 years, every spring I feel like a new farmer. Because this year, I'm going to try to do some things different, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. I don't know what's going to happen, but I have to be ready. And what I have amassed is a set of skills that allow me to continuously try to make better decisions. Because my intention is to continue to grow the best possible crops and products that I can for the people I hope to feed. And I don't think that's any different at any scale. Whether you're a garden and you're faced in the spring with the optimism of seeds, or if you are operating, a multi-generational, multi-thousand acre operation that is primarily operated through machines. You still approach that with that same, I hope, optimism and a sense of purpose.
I like the purpose piece of it. One of the things that everyone kind of came back to was it's not necessarily ownership. It's not necessarily profit. It's not necessarily scale. It really is purpose.
And yet, there is a tension. I fully agree with all of that. But within the farming community, and I farm, I work part-time at the Cornell Small Farms Program, and I also farm. And there is, I think farmers who do this full-time and have a really deep financial stake where their livelihood depends on this incredibly risky profession. I have heard farmers like that basically say that anyone who doesn't farm full-time isn't a farmer. So that there's something with that identity of farmer that has to do with the risk or the financial stake that you have, that you could lose everything. And I don't agree with that. I do think there's some way in which we should recognize the risk that a farmer who has staked their entire livelihood on farming, like the risks that they're taking that are different from someone who is producing at a subsistence scale and is earning their income that pays for their shelter and their food and, whatever else they need, their automobile, that they don't rely on the production from their farm for that. But, there's also, there's probably a sense of pride in having your entire income come from the farm, but there's, I think, a false conception that, that only small farms have other sources of income. And there was a USDA report that came out about 5 years ago in 2019 that talked about how, it was like over 90% of farms maybe it was even 95% of farms. It was like the vast majority of farms at all scales have some off-farm income still, whether it's by necessity or by desire. Whether it's the farmer themselves saying, I also like to do these other things, so I'm going to have another job, or maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's just for the health insurance.
Or off season.
Yeah, or it's for off season if they have a slow season. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's important to dispel the myth that having off-farm income makes you not a farmer in some way, or makes you less of a farmer.
Mm. It makes me think about why do we have to create these divisions?
Yeah.
I mean, who is being served, and what is being served by creating the division? And it's ironic when, like you mentioned earlier, like there's 2% of our population that's devoted to agriculture. Well, wouldn't it make more sense to welcome more people to identify as farmer?
Yeah.
To move that number up in terms of political interest and in terms of activism, in terms of anything that we need to do to move the needle to bring more support into agriculture. Mm. So why be narrow in considering who is a farmer?
Mm-hmm. And I think we heard that in one of the responses. It was, it shouldn't be who is and who isn't. It should be expanding who is. And the who isn't really shouldn't factor into it. Because we don't want to.
What does that serve?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We need more people tending more land, producing more food, having the skills.
The skills, right? And the intention to cultivate skills along with that land to be better. Because I even think about like where are, there's all this need for more farmers, but those individuals are coming from someplace, and they come through sometimes starting on small farms or working on farms and growing their skills and then finding opportunity to move into other ways of managing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking is like in the process of our farm population shrinking down so small, it means that most of us did not have the benefit of growing up on a farm, right? Like we don't get to inherit land. We didn't grow up knowing how to drive a tractor or like how to milk cows or any of these farm skills. And so people coming into farming after that generational or multi-generational gap, it makes sense that they're going to start on a really small scale, whether it's because of financial reasons, because they can't afford all of the infrastructure and the land and everything to get started, or because it's really scary. Like it is
just
so
smart
risky
to start small.
Yeah, exactly. So, people who start on like a postage stamp scale or whatever, because that's what they can do, like that, it seems smart to me. And you just never know how they might grow from there. But this process that we've done over as a country over decades of like just assuming that it's like get big or get out, farms just keep growing and growing and growing in size. Like I don't mean anything bad about those larger farms. I agree that we need bigger farms. I think we need farms at all scales. But that strategy of get big or get out scares me because we've seen what happens during the pandemic, for example, when our supply chains are disrupted and you see empty shelves at grocery stores. And so from a food security perspective, it makes a lot of sense to have a much more distributed food system and have many, many more people who have those skills, and to have the land that's open and available and not built up with developments and all the infrastructure that's needed to grow food for communities.
And when I started my job at Cornell, it was really interesting because I started as a vegetable specialist, and in the vegetable industry, people identify as growers. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, well, grower, producer, farmer, there's all of these names. And in the Northeast, grower has come to represent mostly people working in horticultural crops. So flowers, fruit, vegetables. But in some conversations that I've seen, even in the Midwest, people have been leaning away from the identity of farmer because of this preconceived cultural identity of this is a person who is a little bit of a simpleton, who isn't thoughtful and like, a business person or whatever. So there's this really interesting negative imaging and messaging. I think, again, I feel like it's just tied to the way it's been presented in our culture. Who is a farmer, or what does a farmer look like? But even so in Midwestern farms referring to themselves as growers because they're growing crops and livestock as a way of trying to find their way into something that's representative of the active skill building, the business perspective, the intention of the work that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a disservice to the larger profession of farmer. I mean, I think growers, farmers, producers, all of these people are doing this work with a commitment, an intention, and a passion that can't be forgotten.
We heard that in the Hispanic farming community as well. There are different terms based on the type of crop or the type of land, but really it's all under the same umbrella. Mm. And I think it's interesting the way that language evolves. We step away from using certain terms and then we come back to them over time and reclaim them in new ways. And I think we heard that a little bit with, a farm worker, a farm employee versus a farmer. And sometimes you use that language and sometimes you're more broad and it's based on how the person you're speaking to understands the definitions of those various words and their, preconceptions. And I think that's why we wanted to ask this question as a part of our podcast, because we've seen in our own work, folks working what would be deemed a community garden, but is feeding a community. And maybe it's not for profit, it's food that's being given away. Why is that not a farm? Why do we use garden? It's largely because in urban spaces, that's what the plot of land is called, and therefore that's the language that they continue to use. But the people tending that land, they're farmers. Absolutely they are. And for a while, they weren't participating in programs like we have at Cornell Small Farms, and we cultivated those relationships and broadened our expressions of who is welcome in, and built those bridges so that those folks saw themselves as being welcome in our programming. And we've been able to reach new communities that way who otherwise would see the word farm or farmer and not feel like it necessarily meant them, but really it does.
Yeah, words have power.
It makes me think a little bit about this idea of farm employee, farm worker, and farmer. And certainly in our work, we've met individuals that would be considered employees that have 20 years of experience, are essential to the farm that they work on as the actual farmer, but may or may not ever have the opportunity to advance in their own aspirations to being recognized as a farmer. Yet, absolutely essential to all of our survival in terms of the people who are able to do this work and do it well and continue to improve their own skills. So why do we not call them farmers? Mm-hmm. This is, in other parts of the world, anyone who's tending through labor and intention the growing of crops and livestock are considered farmers. So what is the risk to us all, or not? You're a farmer if you think you are.
You're a farmer if we think you are.
Isn't that the real question?
Mm-hmm.
Is that really? It's like who defines and who's the one who gets to make this definition? When someone identifies as a farmer, I always hope that there is a little bit of standing up taller and feeling a bit more proud and being seen and acknowledged and valued as a contributing member of a community. So there's a role that's there. And so that piece of I do feel, I do say, like, you're a farmer if you think you are, but there is also that piece, like, how do other people see you?
Yeah, for sure.
And, what is the ways in which your work and your intention and the good deeds you do with this thing we call farming, connecting with and supporting a community around you.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that community is global. I mean, this is not about just local. This is about agriculture as a whole.
I think the piece that I keep coming back to is, we heard a voice from Not Our Farm, which is a nonprofit that supports farm employees. And they have a whole section of farm workers and farm employees who answered the question of how they define themselves. And it's called Nomenclature. It's a great section of their website. But a lot of folks responded and said, if farmer is, a goal that I'm working to achieve, there's so much time I've spent and now I call myself a farmer, so much labor that I put in and now I call myself a farmer. And some folks say, I don't think I'll get there until it's something that I own and is mine. And, to see that diversity of folks who are tending land every day, that is their job, it's their profession, but not in an ownership role, hesitating to use that terminology sometimes. Which brings me back to you're a farmer if you think you are, but sometimes you're a farmer if we think you are. Maybe you haven't gotten there yet, or you don't feel like it suits you. But for other folks, they absolutely would call you a farmer.
And there's an honor in that title.
Mm-hmm.
And that is our show. Part of our idea for this show was to create a space for our community to share stories, to talk about the problems they are facing, and together to think about how to build a food system that really works for everyone. That means we really want to hear from you. After listening to this show, who do you think a farmer is? We would love to hear your thoughts, and we hope to feature your message on a future show. So give us a call at 607-255-4455 and share your thoughts. Even better, join us next time and we can look at the West Branch Commons together, which was founded to provide affordable land access for beginning farmers, right here in the Catskills of New York. See you next time.